Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards from Magic Online. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
You surprised me there. I was going to ask you if I was centered.
Hey, Reuben Bressler.
Are we centered, or do we need to?
Aaron, just scooch a little to the right.
Do we need to realign?
Okay.
Are we good?
Good.
Well,
good.
I think we're all right.
I think we're doing okay.
And it's a good.
If I
thing
watch
too,
this on
because-
Friday and I'm off the frame, I'm gonna get you.
Oh. Well, now
Yikes.
I experience fear. Well, look, we also
she's gonna mill you. That's what's gonna happen.
nice.
In the dust.
Into the dust. We also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Reuben will tell us who was the most eloquent, letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 Jumpstart cards. Reuben?
It's grandiloquent now, Evan. You didn't switch the script. It's grandiloquent. This week's winner is Panda John 71, who writes, not exactly a strong card, but it is one new card that will likely get an altar by a Simpsons fan, with Mr. Burns somewhere saying, release the hounds. Release the dogs is my choice for honorable mention, as all the other new cards worth speaking about are spoken for. And I refuse to mention the reprints, as they are immensely popular and known, and maybe deserve their own list.
Top 10 Jumpstart reprints. It's a 500 card set.
That's a lot.
It's really big, and there was like less than 50 new cards, but
we could do
surprisingly hard to get a hold
reprints of 2020 at some point.
I can see that. Well,
Wizards has been good about the reprints lately.
Yeah.
they have. Release the Dogs, for those who don't know, is a white and 3 generic mana for an uncommon sorcery that's currently over almost $3 because Jumpstart's hard to find.
Jumpstart.
But as a 4 mana sorcery, it makes 4 1/1 white dog creature tokens. So
Nice.
4 mana
Can't
for
believe
1
this is
1.
called Who Let the Dogs Out, you know?
Right. Yeah, how did we not get a Baja Men reference out of this one?
It's true. It was right there the whole time.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to our standard Simpsons reference creator, Super Nintendo Chalmers, on that one as well.
True, longtime supporter. All right. Well, congratulations to Panda John 71. And please contact Erin on social media before she blocks you on all of them.
I'm thinking about it.
Thanks again to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this giveaway. And stay tuned for our top 10 list this week, and maybe you can win next week's free gift certificate. Because it is time to talk about mill cards. Wizards, as of Core Set 2021, officially keyworded the idea of putting the top card of your library, or the top card of a library, into a graveyard as milling. And that's awesome. And I'm excited about it. And this was a way more cool list to put together than I was expecting. Like, there's a bunch of really cool mill cards.
Yeah, I was kind of dreading this at first. I didn't know if there would be enough. I didn't know if it'd be something I was interested in. And, you know, when I started making my list, I got about 3 cards in and I was having a really good time. And then before I knew it, I had 20 or 30 candidates. It's like, okay, we got to rein it in a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Now, I will say that I separated my wheat from the chaff before my mill by not doing self-mill stuff. I decided to leave my list entirely putting cards from an opponent's library or a player, but like primarily targeting the opponent as for whatever reason. That's personally just how I did it, and either putting it into a graveyard or into exile. Even though mill is keyworded as into the graveyard, there are some mill cards out there I think qualify as mill cards that go straight to exile. So that's how I built my list.
I don't think I picked anything that was strictly self-mill. I think if I picked anything, it's like everybody has to do it.
Right.
But I tend to agree with you on that.
I think if it had the word mill in it, it was fair game for me. So
Sure. I mean, we could have done an entire self-mill episode, is my point, where Aaron had Splinter Fright at number 1.
And you had Leviathan at number 1, right? Of course.
I had Leviathan at 2.
I got to make a really nasty play with that card. I took my Cathedral deck out for a spin the other day. I did a webcam game with Benny Smith, and I got to play with Greater Good for the first time.
Yeah.
I've never had the pleasure.
That is a heck of a card.
So I sacrificed a Splinter Fright. It was a 12-12. So I went sacrifice it for 12, draw 3, discard Zatalpa, Karametra, and Vampire Nighthawk.
Well, draw 12, discard 3. Yeah, that's not
Seems
bad.
decent. Yeah.
Cheapers.
Card is so good.
card was nuts. Should have played with the Kamigawa Legendary Dragons back in the day.
Yeah,
thing you could
sacrificing Yase to
tap down all their stuff. They skipped their untap step.
Yikes.
Loved it. Let's move on here to number 10. Aaron, kick us off. What's your number 10?
Well, speaking of Commander, this is a card that I don't recall ever seeing play in Standard, but has found a home in a couple Commander decks. I feel like I've seen it more in Commander. It's going for about $3 to $4 right now, depending on where you get it for. I could have sworn it was more expensive than that at one point. My number 10 is Altar of the Brood. So Altar of the Brood is one colorless. It's an artifact. It says whenever another permanent, that is permanent, y'all, tokens, enchantments, lands, and people forget that when this card comes out. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into their graveyard. So not you, everybody else. It is surprisingly easy to trigger this thing, and tends to lead to really broken strategies. And this is just one of those cards that I was like, I would read it, thought I knew it, and then have to read it again. But at 1 mana, this is quite good.
It's as cheap as they could make it, I think, within reason.
Yes.
You don't want this to be
Absolutely.
a zero-cost artifact where you drop 4 of them on turn 1 and then everything you do mills 4. That's weird. But, if you're going to run a playset and you kind of like, this is the type of card that has those crazy interactions of, okay, once you've got Altar on the Brood, you do this loop and they're dead.
Right.
Right?
This was a win condition in the Jeskai Ascendancy deck for a while.
Oh.
Because you could loop it with, your Astral Cornucopia or
Right,
Briber's Purse, keep bouncing it back to your hand over and over again, and then this would mill them out. This has been a combo. It slots in that combo piece slot very easily, being 1 mana, colorless, like easy to get. When I first saw this, I was like, oh no, something horrific is going to happen. But yeah, that's a good one.
It's interesting. It's played often here, it looks like, on EDH Rec with things like Seki Season's Guide, which says things like,
What does that do?
it's a 8 mana 0/0 that comes into play with 8+1/+1 counters on it.
Oh, yeah.
If damage will be dealt to it, you prevent it, remove that many +1/+1 counters, and make that many 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens into play. So, the ability for you to essentially kind of burst out into different permanents that then mill your opponent as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that card is super cool. And again, I agree. I felt like at one point this card started getting expensive, but even now, it's almost $4. Just as a weird little mill card, I'll take it. Reuben, what's your number 10?
My number 10, not playable in Commander, but saw a tiny bit of play in Standard, and it makes me happy. It just, like, reading this card, seeing the card, it brings me back. It's a small reminder of a simpler time back in Eventide when I tried to make sanity grinding work. And it just makes me feel good. Sanity grinding is a blue rare sorcery from Eventide with Chroma. Reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each blue mana symbol in the mana costs of the revealed cards, target opponent mills a card. Wow. Then put the cards you revealed in this way on the bottom of your library in any order. So you'd play this obviously with Cryptic Command, but you also had access to things like Dream Fracture. You obviously had Twin Cast at the time as well to get more sanity grindings. And you could you just played like Plume Veils, I guess, in your deck to play defense, and it wasn't good. But it was available.
It was weird. This was that 4 Howling Mine, 4 sanity grinding, 4 Time Warp was in the format.
Wow.
It was insane. It was a very small window, and even then, ever since then, this is just a casual favorite. Like, I've seen people go nuts over this card for no really good reason other than, like, look at all the blue mana symbols, look how much you could mill.
People love mill. There's like that small subset, like Aaron always says, there's that little group of people who are just mill apologists, and they want nothing more than to put bits of grain between them and a stone and turn it into wheat flour.
This art, though, can we talk about this? You have like these people or these ghosts that are turning this giant, it almost looks like the wheel of a ship, and then like they're doing it, and then there's this static, and then there's this essence being generated. There's a lot to unpack here. This is beautiful.
Yeah, their sanity's being ground into a small bucket. Okay, that's cool. That seems...
Which is, mood.
That is 2020 right there, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations. All right. So for my number 10 here, this was a card that I felt personally snuck up on a lot of people. Back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean 15 years ago, because I'm an old man. Back in the day, mill was kind of understood as like, it's kind of fun, it's interesting, it's a casual, whatever. But it was never kind of respected as, you could really sell some packs of Magic cards using a mill card. And when Wizards said, okay, you know what? We're going to make one of the most powerful mill spells ever up to that point, and it stayed that way for a good long time, with a 2-mana spell called Glimpse the Unthinkable.
Oh, yeah.
Ravnica, City of Guilds. This thing is still like $8 or $9. It's a black and a blue for a rare sorcery that says target player puts the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. Target player mills 10 cards.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to see another promo with that printed on it. That's going to be great.
I mean, this is, we talk a lot about how cards that don't necessarily see play in competitive formats have huge audiences. Think dragons, think angels. And you can tell because they usually have hefty price tags. The same goes for mill. I think people knock mill as being this sort of lulzy strategy. Have you actually tried building a mill deck? It's not cheap.
Very expensive.
Like between the glimpses and the archive traps, which we might talk about, and all of the pieces, the hedron crabs that are still, I think, can get a pretty nice price tag. And so, it says something that people love this so much that's what if it was ridiculous and if nobody liked it, they'd be 35 cents and nobody would really care about it. But going back to that contingent, people who just love mill, that's the reason why these cards cost money, because people who love them are buying them and playing them.
Yeah, like nobody played Mind Funeral in Constructed. Mirko Vosk isn't sought after for its legacy playability.
Right.
They have playability because of the casual format.
It was around, I don't want to say like 2008, maybe 2009, and someone was talking about Ravnica, and like the most expensive card in the set was Glimpse the Unthinkable, and I was like, what?
And it's not playable in any format.
Absolutely not. Yeah, that was incredible. So that was a mind-blowing moment. Let's move on here to number 9. Mine is higher on somebody else's list, but Aaron, do you got one?
My number 9 has become a card that I love so much, and it took me a little while to pick up on it. It can be used offensively, or it can even be used to fuel your own strategy, and it just has a nice little static ability on it that is very relevant in multiple formats. Criminally underplayed in Commander. My number 9 is Ashyak Dreamrender. So Ashyak Dreamrender is 1 colorless and 2 hybrid mana of blue and black, so you can mix it up however you want to. Legendary Planeswalker Ashyak starts off with 5 loyalty. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library. So no fetching, no tutors. Tutors make Commander go round. You can also -1 Ashyak. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard and then exile each opponent's graveyard. What I and a lot of people missed about this card when it first came out is the person that mills does not have to be the same person that's been exiled. So if you're playing a graveyard strategy, you can mill yourself and then exile everybody else's graveyards while you're at it. So you can use it to do, to feed your own graveyard, or if you want to just sort of add insult to injury, you can mill them, hope that you're hitting something they want, and then exile that. And so the fact that it stops tutoring, the fact that it's flexible, can be played in different colors, it's cheap, it's graveyard hate, it can also fill your graveyard as well. It's a beloved character, beautiful art. I mean, the card is just stellar.
Yeah. You can also just get people if they're leaving their 1 mana up for Enlightened Tutor and you're like Ashyak.
People walk into it all the time.
I can't search, but I also will get targeted with the mill if I search now. So I guess I have to attack it later, I guess. Yeah, that card's brutal. It was really good and constructed when it was a Golos Field of the Dead format as well. Obviously, it stops Fabled Passage. It stops a ton of stuff.
He's playing Modern. John loves this card,
Yeah, this card was also included as part of the Japanese War of the Spark alternate art cards, which were super duper cool. And a foil version of that is $60, ladies and gentlemen, because that's how cool
You know what that art reminded me of? I'm going to take you back in the time machine here. Do you remember Power Rangers?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. One of the very first villains was a villain called Madame Woe. YouTube, don't leave me hanging here. And if you look up Madame Woe, that's what this reminds me of when I look at the Japanese promo art with like the mask and the gem and the white skin. I just imagine that.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Very nice. Reuben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is, it's very rare that you get a mill card that actually won a Pro Tour. And we haven't had a mill deck win a Pro Tour. We've never had, we had Sphinx's Tutelage win a Grand Prix one time in the hands of Michael Majors. That's like about it. There's very rarely are you going to get a deck where the main win condition is milling. But Lantern Control qualifies, and one of the very best ways to mill in Lantern Control is Codex Shredder.
Oh, the
Codex Shredder is a 1 colorless mana artifact that is an uncommon, originally from Return to Ravnica. With tap, target player mills a card, and pay 5 colorless, tap, and sacrifice Codex Shredder. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Obviously, this was the Luis Salvato Lantern Control go-to, much better than your Pixes of Pandemoniums and what have you, with your other 1 mana things that sort of do something like this. But Codex Shredder is the best one. You can rebuy, destroyed artifacts that you went and searched for with your Whir of Invention, things like Ensnaring Bridge or Grafdigger's Cage or whatever you want to go get back, while also just sitting on the board, being able to keep the top of your opponent's library at bay.
Who could have predicted that this card would not only see tournament play, but be in a tier 1 deck?
Right.
I certainly didn't. What?
Pro Tour Rivals of Ixalan was interesting. I think it really just showed that, it was one of those times where, much like eggs, it's like, I get that that's the best deck in the format. And I get that you're a very good player that it takes to play out a deck like that. I never want to see that deck ever again. In my whole life, I never want to hear commentators talk about it. I don't want to hear them try to explain the plays of it. I don't want to see the cards up on the screen. Just go home. Just take the trophy, go home.
Scoop to it. I was like, you know what? I don't need to win this bad. It's just a sanity draining experience. And then I discovered that Ad Nauseam had a decent matchup against it. So then I started to stick those games out. But if it was Dredge versus this, it was rough. And I was just like, you know what? I could be eating convention center chicken fingers right now.
You've only got so many minutes on this planet, and they're
No, ma'am.
Lantern, and you're like, all right.
No, ma'am.
All right.
Yep.
Go read a book or something. Jeez.
I love playing Lantern, though. I gotta tell you, it is a nice experience to play Lantern.
Because you're a supervillain. Got it. All right.
I am a supervillain.
So we'll hear to number 8. Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is a card that was a recent innovation in Modern Dredge. Another one of those cards that you never dreamed would find a home. And not only does it also fuel our strategy, but I have also been able to kill a few people with it. My number 8 is Shriekhorn. So Shriekhorn is 1 colorless. It was originally printed in Mirrodin Besieged. It's an artifact, enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. You can tap it and remove a charge counter from Shriekhorn. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So when we lost Grave Troll, we needed a really nice way to fuel up our graveyard. And, the brewers did the math and they determined that this is really good. Where it comes into play recently is a lot of Thassa's Oracle decks are running around. And so you have a lot of people that are milling themselves very, very low. And I can't tell you how many times I have got somebody when they're down to 2 cards and they do their little Manamorphose and then whoop!
Gotcha.
It's target player, and then they lose their cards, and then you wait the minute while it's on the stack, and you're just like, what? Wait, what?
You didn't plan for this contingency? Weird.
And so it feels amazing. So if you're playing Modern Dredge and you're up against a deck that's going really low, save your Shriekhorns because you can get people with this.
Yeah. I remember drafting a couple of the Shriekhorn decks in Limited and just being like, turn 1 Shriekhorn, turn 2 more Shriekhorns. It's like, all right, beat it, I guess. Here you go. Play a 2/5 on turn 4 and
Block
just
forever.
Hope for the best.
Oh my god.
The Shriekhorn feels like one of those cards where, if you had to bet, this would be one of the lowest cards on that totem pole to bet on as being one of the most winning cards of the set. It just turns out when you have the ability to do it for no mana, to mill, quote unquote, for no mana, that is powerful. Even if you only get 3 tries and 3 bites of the apple or sometimes
it's 6
enough.
cards. I mean, it's Dredge 6 for 1 mana over the course of 3 turns, which isn't perfect. It's Costco brand, but you know what? It does the job.
Yeah, it gets you there. All right.
We've got Grave Troll at home, and this is Grave Troll at home.
This is
It also
Grave
screws
Troll
up
at
your
home.
scries. If somebody's doing some scry to the top, whoop, not anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love messing with people's scries.
Messing with scries is really nice.
Scry me a river.
Mm-hmm. Reuben, what's your 8?
So my number 8, 7, and 6 are all my 3 hires, all in a row on other people's lists.
Wow.
Oh my god.
All right. My number 8 here is I would probably call this close to a cube all-star. I think basically in the way that it's made, not necessarily in the way that it was designed, if that makes any sense. Maybe we'll get there. The idea that you have planeswalkers in cubes are fine. The idea that you have planeswalkers that provide incremental amount of advantages, that's okay. They're drawing you cards or whatever. Sometimes they make a body, sometimes they make something indestructible or whatever. Sometimes they shrink something. Whole variety of ways planeswalkers have changed things in the game. But only one has just straight ended games thanks to its milling ability, and that is Jace Memory Adept. Jace Memory Adept first showed up in Magic 2012. It is 2 blue, 3 generic mana for a 4 loyalty mythic planeswalker Jace with +1, draw a card, target player mills a card. 0:0:0 target player mills 10 cards. -7: any number of target players each draw 20 cards.
Never saw it.
Which you never play ever. You just play the 0 until they die, and that's how it works. And sealed, it was a giganto bomb, and in draft, it was still a bomb and not quite as good. But in cube, it was just as ridiculous. And you just kept it back a couple turns, protected it a little bit, and before you know it, you milled everything they had.
10 cards is too many cards for limited. There's a reason why Sword of Body and Mind is probably either the worst or second worst sword for constructed, but by far the best for cube.
Yeah.
Jace Memory Adept did win a Pro Tour in the hands of Yvonne Flock in Blue-White Control as a one of in the sideboard. It came in those super control-y matchups. It was popular in the Devotion to Blue sideboards and Blue-White Control sideboards of the day. But it's a 5-mana planeswalker that just says, all right, here's 5. You have 4 turns to beat me at best. Yeah. And in limited, it's like 2 turns. And yeah, it's just way, 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 way too good.
Yeah, if this goes off 3 times in limited, you're just dead.
You're just dead.
You're just dead. I'm sorry. You're just finished. Let's move on here to number 7. Aaron, what's number 7?
My number 7 is a card that I had the pleasure of getting people with during Origin Standard. I don't play Standard often, and, I remember this deck being fairly cheap to put together. I had a lot of the cards just kind of laying around. We were also in a format where there happened to be some monocolored or 2-colored decks floating around, so it was very easy to get going. Just a hilarious feeling, because you didn't really do anything other than draw cards, but sometimes that's enough. My number 7, Sphinx's Tutelage. So Sphinx's Tutelage is 2 colorless and a blue. It's an enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. If they are both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. And you can also pay 5 colorless and a blue to draw a card and then discard a card. So you were running all sorts of weirdness. There was the Chandra's Goggles that would copy draw spells. So you were playing Magmatic Insight, or you were playing Tormenting Voice, and you didn't really do anything. You might have some overpriced red kill spells if you had to kill something, but it was very non-interactive. You would just sort of sit back and draw a bunch of spells and hope to God you could chain enough together and mill them to death. And it just felt really, really good.
When you read Sphinx's Tutelage and you go over and you read Teferi's Tutelage from Magic 2021, you recognize how they toned it back to something realistic. Sphinx's Tutelage is in of itself its own kind of engine. You can activate itself to draw cards, whereas Teferi's Tutelage is okay, we'll give you this bonus.
Gets to come into play.
And you get that one come into play, but that's it.
What really pushed it over the top, though, was it was just that sweet spot in the metagame. We were in a format where, because some formats are very 3-color, 4-color, or more. You really don't see, not every format has a monocolored deck or even a 2-color deck. And if I remember correctly, it was many years ago, but I just remember really preying on those decks where you would get the right deck and be like, oh, you just...
the other thing, the wording is that they share a color. So if you hit a mono green card and a Siege Rhino, you're still milling them for 45. And so you could keep going. Michael Majors actually won a Grand Prix with a blue-red control deck that just preyed on these mid-range, slow, play a threat on turn 3, 4, 5. But I've already got my Sphinx's Tutelage down. My engine's already running by the time you're trying to kill me against your, Constellation deck or whatever. And that's basically the only time this deck has ever done anything. Psychic Corrosion, it never really took off. That's the super bare bones version of Sphinx's Tutelage. And they keep making 2 colorless and blue enchantments that have this kind of effect.
Right.
We'll see if they ever come back again.
Right. This one was 6 mana you can loot, but also you have that double mill thing. You keep going if they just so happen to be the same colors and stuff. That's cool. But for my number 7 here, there is a list, and I don't know how exactly Wizards keeps up with it, but there's definitely a list somewhere of the most expensive things that Wizards has never reprinted. And recently, they've passed a lot of those barriers, which, like Grim Tutor, for example. You had, what was the 4-mana thing from Zendikar? Oracle of Moldiah, for example, was another one of like, man, we needed that reprint. Well, let me tell you, I've got another one. Ooh. They only printed this thing one time. It is a really interesting yet powerful effect. It's interesting and powerful because it's free. You don't have to do anything to make this artifact do what you want it to do. All you have to do is untap permanents for Mesmeric Orb in order to trigger. Mesmeric Orb is a 2 generic mana rare artifact from Mirrodin that says whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. So for $23, a foil of almost $60 now, this card needs a reprint because mill players love it. It's cool, it's cheap, and you can trigger the crap out of it a variety of ways.
It turns into a neat little sub-game of how can I possibly play Magic without triggering this thing, and you can't. Like, if you tap, well, now you need to untap, and so everything you do just has this cost to it, and you find yourself just doing this weird little dance. And, you know, this is another one of those things that can also be beneficial to you. You know, if you want to be milling yourself, you are happy to do this, but, you know, for everybody else that actually values the cards in their deck, they're going to have a really, really hard time with this.
Yeah. There was a brief shining moment where this was a centerpiece of a legacy deck called the Four Horsemen.
Yes!
And that was, by shining moment, what I mean is everyone was scrambling to figure out how we could get people to not play Four Horsemen. Because the whole point was you played a Basalt Monolith and you played a Mesmeric Orb, and then you went to town. Like, you just milled your whole self.
Yep.
But it wasn't just that you milled yourself. You milled yourself, ... until the only card left in your deck was a Emrakul, because otherwise all the cards would shuffle back into your deck.
Right.
And so you would just, like, do this until you got lucky, I guess.
You had, like,
and so then they said that it was... what?
Wasn't it like Narcomoeba's Dread Return?
Yeah. There's Narcomoeba's Dread Returns, other graveyard randomness.
I remember this. They had to do like a special ruling where they were just like, look, you can't just sit there and cycle through your deck for an hour. Like, you got to say, look, this is the game state you're getting to.
It's one of those decks that just feels like a forbidden art. Like when you hear about like 2-card Monty or you hear about Doomsday, you know, it's just one of those weird decks where when someone tells you about it, you're just like, wow, because it's just, and not everybody's brave enough to play it either. Like you got to be a particularly, a certain kind of mad person to want to play this, but there's just nothing else like it.
I got to tell you, it's a very rare thing, Hall, but it is a treat to play this card in limited. You will never in your life see such a weird dance of like, I want to tap out for this fatty, but they use a removal spell that costs less than my fatty. Oh my God. And you're trying to make these weird trades so they'll untap and tap their stuff. Yep. It's absolutely hilarious. And yeah, this card needs a reprint and bad.
Yeah.
Let's move on here to number 6. Aaron, what's your number 6?
My number 6, Reuben, when you mentioned Jace, I immediately thought of this card because the feeling of losing to a Jace in that way, it really does feel like you're drowning. And there's no card that exemplifies that feeling more than my number 6, which is Nefalia Drownyard, affectionately known as Nefalia Frownyard as well. So Nefalia Drownyard is a land only printed once in Innistrad. You can tap it for 1 colorless, or you can pay a colorless, a blue, and a black, and tap it. Target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. This was a win condition. Like there was an Esper control deck that's whole point was to bore you to tears and make sure that you do absolutely nothing and continue with Detention Sphere and gain a bunch of life with Sphinx's Revelation, and then just whoop, 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 and it was the worst feeling in the world. Like you felt like you couldn't keep your head above water, pun intended, and you just felt like I can't do anything. I'm watching myself, lose this way. I'm sitting here at like a healthy life total. What is going on? And just a very confusing bummer of a card to lose to.
This is my number 7.
Nice.
This is a staple control card. This is the Shaheen Saraniest of all Shaheen Sarani cards. Alian Trazi loves this style of card as well. Ben Stark made top 4 of Pro Tour Gatecrash with a boring, just like watching paint dry Esper control deck that had 4 Augur of Bolas just to like, and like just creature,
and
like
another
no
one of those
creatures
cards that the
in it.
meta has to support, and because I remember I remember Millstone. So this card rotated, and then I remember we got Millstone in a core set. And people were like just hoping they could naturally transition to be like, oh, well, you know, we came up, and it just wasn't the same. Like there was just something about this.
One's
that
a land and
one's a land.
Yeah,
it's
one's
free.
But they tried, you know. I think we've all done that.
Sure.
I think we've all came out of a rotation hoping to recreate the magic with the cards we have, and.
Look, the idea that you can play a deck was 4 Supreme Verdict, 4 Sphinx's Revelation. This is the deck that ran Jace Memory Adept main.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, this was a slow, grinding you to death control deck, and it existed for a while.
Yep.
So, GG. All right. Let's see here. My number 6 is a interesting card that just recently kind of blew up all over again. And this is one of those cards that, again, if we were talking about self-mill, you'd probably put that in there. But there's also kind of a sort of chain of artifacts that relies on this artifact as well to kind of all work together. And when they all work together, it's very cute. But when you have Underworld Breach, all you care about is Grinding Station.
Yep.
Grinding Station is a 2 generic mana. Good lord, it's an $8 uncommon, only printed once. A 2 generic mana uncommon artifact from 5th Dawn. It has tap, sacrifice an artifact, target player mills 3 cards. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you may untap Grinding Station. Now, Underworld Breach is a 2 mana enchantment that sacks itself at the end of the turn, but it also says all of the cards in your graveyard have escape of 3. So if you have a 0-cost artifact that has escape of 3, Grinding Station gets it back for free, and it untaps Grinding Station to play it. So there you go. There's your loop, and you can do all sorts of crazy, weird, stupid things from there.
Yep, and you just mill your entire deck, and then you can cast your Thassa's Oracle from your graveyard to win the game.
Yep. And that's how you do it. So this card in and of itself was, honestly, I think it just flew under the graveyard, or flew under the radar for a very long time, not the graveyard. But this card nowadays is just like, yep, it's fantastic, and it's really dumb for 2 mana. I like it.
For sure.
All right. Moving here to number 5. Reuben, you finally have one. What is it?
I do have a number 5, and it's kind of cheating, I guess, for me to have this on my list. It does mill. It does do that.
Leviathan Mills? I didn't know that. That's weird.
Well, I mean, to be fair, this thing does have Leviathan-like stats, because it's a 10-10 for 10.
Oh my god.
It is Ulum the Ceaseless Hunger.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
So, Ulum the Ceaseless Hunger, 10 colorless mana for a 10-10 legendary creature Eldrazi. When you cast this spell, exile 2 target permanents. It has indestructible, and whenever Ulum the Ceaseless Hunger attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of their library. So, it doesn't have trample. It can get chump blocked. You're not necessarily killing them with damage. If you reanimate it with something like an Unburial Rites and Historic, the way that you're killing them is by milling them. And it doesn't take many swings to get 20 at a time out of their library.
You know what?
I've certainly killed people by milling with this a number of times.
So let me get
more
this
common
straight. Let me get this straight.
in Cube, actually, to kill by milling with this than by damage.
We've waited 27 years. I would argue maybe 26-ish, whatever, for Wizards to codify what the word mill means.
Yeah.
To actually go through an errata, every single card that mills, to have the word mill in it.
Yeah.
This card doesn't have the word mill in it.
It sure doesn't. Let me ask you a question. Now, if you were to say, we looked at one Ashyak. Let's look at a different Ashyak. Let's look at like Ashyak Nightmare Weaver. Does that mill?
No, it exiles.
Oh, we're making that distinction.
Well,
Right.
but look,
This
Ashyak
is my
Dreamrender
point.
mills the top 4 cards of target player's library. It has the word in it, the word that they codified, the
So
word
you're
that
saying
we're
that
bringing this whole list for.
mill has to lead to the graveyard.
Right.
Mill
That's what he
mill
said.
cards have to have the word
And
mill in them
I literally said before the show started, before we went through our top 10 list, that I had cards on my list that can exile instead of just putting it into
Allow me to give you the perfect example. If we said, hey, Reuben, we want your top 10 tramplers, and he chose Thorn Elemental, and we're like, dude, that's not trampling. It's not, it's a weird way to move damage. And you're like, well, you move damage when you trample. And you're like, no, you don't. That's not how it works. It's not a trampler. This card doesn't mill. That's all I'm saying. we're in a Leviathan situation all over again.
If my main win condition is to remove cards from your library so that you lose on your draw step for trying to draw a card from an empty library, that counts as milling victory for me.
Unbelievable. Aaron, what's number 5?
My number 5 is one of 2 hires that I have on my list.
Fair enough. All right. So for my number 5, I hate to put really new cards on lists that we do because, obviously you're afraid that these things are going to age poorly or you're not really sure if it's it's sort of a cold shot in many ways. But I couldn't get around the fact that this felt like a top 5 mill card when Wizards finally gets around to making a legendary creature who doubles all of your mill stuff. Bruvak, the Grandiloquent. Is it Bruvak or Bruvak? I have no idea. Legend, it's for a blue and 2 generic mana for a 1/4 legendary human advisor. This is a mythic that's almost $50 freaking right now. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. Simple, beautiful, doubling season-esque, what every mill player would want to have, which is why I felt it was worthy of the top 5. If you like mill cards, I can't imagine you don't want this card in your deck.
The rubber band is about to be on the other claw, Evan.
Oh, okay. It has the word mill in it, but okay, go for it.
It does. It doesn't itself mill.
Wow.
If you're attacking with this, if this is the card that you have in play, unlike Altar of the Brood, unlike Mesmeric Orb, unlike any of the other cards on our list,
right.
You do not mill with this card.
Look,
this simply powers up your other mill cards. Is Doubling Season a counters card?
I mean, yeah.
If we had a +1/+1 counters list,
I probably wouldn't put it on it, but I would at least understand it. But again, this is like if you had a list with flying, but the creature you chose didn't have flying. Like this has the word mill on it. Like it does mill things. It doubles mill things. They codified the term. That's why we're here. Anyway, I like Bruvak. I think it's awesome.
I like the flying example. I feel like there's an enchantment that favorable wins. If we had a top 10 flying creatures list, or top 10 cards with flying.
Yes.
And I had favorable wins on my list.
You would be so wrong, it would hurt me. It would physically hurt my body.
And that is different how?
What do you mean it's different how?
How is that different than having Bruvak the Grandiloquent
it's close.
on your mill cards list?
Fine, that one's a little close. All right, let's keep moving. Aaron, what's your number 4?
I accept your apology.
My number 4 is a card I've mentioned on this very episode. It's been a staple of mill decks. It sees play in competitive formats. You can play it in Modern. I think they play it in the Modern version of the Vengevine decks. I think it also sees play in the Legacy version as well. Was the All-Star in Vintage in the Eric's Crapshack deck. Where you would pair it with such hits as
Crabshack, baby.
With Retreat to Hagra.
You did it. Yep.
My number 4 is Hedron Crab. So Hedron Crab is 1 blue. It's a do you say Hedron or Hedron? I'm curious.
I say Hedron.
I say Hedron.
Hedron? Okay, making sure. And if it was like Tippy Hedron, which is a great drag name. Anyways, with like Hedrons everywhere. Hedron. I went deep for that, but we had to. Hedron Crab, 1 blue.
Really deep reference.
Let me have this. So Hedron Crab is 1 blue. It's originally printed in Zendikar, creature type crab, 0 power, 2 toughness, with landfall. Whenever a land enters battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is whenever a land, so you're in a format with fetches, and so that counts, and so you can mill yourself if you want to. If you're playing a Vengevine list, you can mill your opponent if you want to. And this is not a May trigger, so if you really want to get a Hedron Crab player, play Leyland of Sanctity, because it's hilarious. The card's gone down in price quite a bit. It's about $1 or $2 now, thanks to the mystery boosters. I have it in my Muldrotha deck in Commander because slamming this on turn 1 is just a great way to keep the engine going. And so a lot of love for this card, and I'm glad it's more affordable now.
This was one of those cards that I was not expecting to be expensive. It felt like it was kind of weird, a little marginal. Like, you want to talk about a card you saw on all the draft tables after everybody had left. Like, it was Hedron Crabs, just, as far as the eye could see, because no one really cared about it back in the day. And
then when you have, smaller formats, even Extended played Hedron Crabs in Dredge back at Pro Tour Austin. 2 of the top 8 decks had 4 Hedron Crabs in their Dredge decks.
Goodness gracious.
So, it's been played not just in mill decks, which obviously it's great with fetch lands, getting those 6 cards like you do, but also, self-mill. So it targets everybody.
Yeah, the interaction with fetch lands clearly was what sort of pushed it over the top. But it was great to kind of sort of notice one day, it's like, wait a minute. That's a really efficient milling card.
So Tippi Hedren.
Tippi
Hedren is an actress who starred in The Birds.
Yes!
You ever see The Birds?
Yes, I saw The Birds.
need to.
She's the main actress from The Birds.
Right. And
she was also in I Heart Huckabees.
Yes.
Okay.
She has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Show some respect.
She's been awarded the Jules Verne Award for excellence in exploration, environmental, and cinematic achievement.
Big up, Tippi.
Very nice. Very nice.
There you go. There's your movie trivia for Tippi Hedren.
Get tipped. All right.
For the day.
Reuben, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is another card that I can't wait to get into an existential debate over what is a mill card exactly. This card has the word mill on it. Mm-hmm. This one definitely does mill. This
We're halfway home.
Actively mills cards. I'm not sure I've ever seen it mill cards. But there is no doubting that it has won a Pro Tour. It is in the Magic the Gathering online cube. Okay. It is probably the most played of any of the cards on my list over the history of its lifespan in all formats. And it is the only entry on my list that made the 128 most popular cards of all time, according to the MTG bracket. My number 4 is Jace Valerian.
I mean, it's better than Vryn's Prodigy. I was waiting on you to tell me Vryn's Prodigy.
Not Vryn's Prodigy. Jace Valerian, colorless blue. Gets you a legendary Planeswalker Jace that enters with 3 loyalty. +2, each player draws a card. -1, target player draws a card. And -10, target player mills 20 cards.
This card is dope. I will give this to you, no problem. Sure. Because it does say mill on it. It mills a whole bunch of cards. That's a thing it can do. You and I both know it never did that. It's fine.
Oh yeah. It's never activated that ability.
Right. It drew you a card, then it drew you a card, then it drew both players a card. Right. And we continued this onward until you died.
Right. And it was just a 3-mana Ancestral Recall, basically.
Yeah, more or less. You just kill it off, or even just play another one, for example.
Right.
And these were in the original. This was one of the original Lore Run 5, of course. And while Garrick was the best one, Jace was certainly not the worst one, and got to see plenty of play at the time, and was super cool, and I've enjoyed it. And I think, honestly, Jace Valerian is just as cool and interesting and playable today as he was back then.
Oh, yeah. I think that if they reprinted Jace Valerian, it would instantly become one of the best Planeswalkers in Standard. I mean, 4-mana Planeswalkers used to be the standard. Now you have 3-mana Planeswalkers. This one can't protect itself.
It can't protect itself, but it can go up to 5 loyalty, which at least at the time was gigantic.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Whereas now the Royal Scions begin with like 37, and like you're like, well, whatever, it's fine. Who cares? Okay. All right. For my number 4, and again, this could be one of those cards that we draw lines in the sand for because they usually do stupid things to yourself. It's fine. But again, looking up the word mill, here's the card that's super cool. It's worth a bunch of money. It had a tournament pedigree until it broke things completely in half, which is fine. But Wizards did finally reprint it in Modern Horizons, which was appreciated, a.k.a. Altar of Dementia.
Oh, yeah.
Altar of Dementia is a 2 generic... Oh, nice.
This was my number 8. We agree on this one.
Nice. Number 5 for Aaron and number 8 for Reuben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Altar of Dimension is a 2 generic mana rare artifact originally from Tempest. That says, sacrifice a creature, target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And Aaron, I think better than any of us, you can explain how stupidly busted this ability is.
Who would have thought that this card would open the floodgates in the way that it did? So it came out in Modern Horizons. It took a minute. People were like, well, that's cute. Like, all right, welcome to Modern. And then people started to put the pieces together and realized that we also had Hogak. And we also had Stitcher Supplier, and we had Bloodgas, and we had Vengevines, and we had, all sorts of things like that. We had Bridge from Below. And before you know it, you started to see this really broken deck that could go infinite really, really quickly. And not only mill yourself, but then turn around and mill the opponent too. And so even if you had a way to deal with all of these creatures, and Hogak also could loop with other Hogaks as well. So Hogak you could feed and then redo it. And it just happened so quickly and was surprisingly resilient. You'll remember that one Pro Tour where Leyline of the Void was the most popular, card at the Pro Tour. They had to ban Bridge from Below, and then eventually they banned Hogak itself because, largely because of this card. This was really the card that got people brewing. Still sees play in Legacy. The Legacy Hogak lists still tend to run this or the Vengevine decks, but, it's just one of those cards that was reprinted that made such a huge impact, maybe even more than it did at the time. Like, was it this big when it came out?
It was not this big when it came out. It was competitive and in competitive decks when it came out in much different strategies. Obviously, Hogak with Bridge from Below allowed you to mill yourself and then mill your opponent. Like, the way that you could win with Hogak was milling your opponent with this.
And even when there was no Bridge from Below, at that point you had Bloodghast, you had Carrion Feeders, Grave Crawlers, Satyr Wayfinders, like the ability to throw everything.
You had stuff to throw at people.
You had 4 Faithless Looting still in the format. You could run that card. That card's dumb.
To give you some context, this card was in 2 competitive decks back when it was available in Tempest. One was Recurring Survival. It was a win condition in Recurring Survival, and also would feed your Coffin Queens and things like that in Recurring Survival. And it was the main win condition in a deck called Abducted Drake, which very nearly won the European Championship in 1999. It comboed with Iridescent Drake and Abduction. To sacrifice your Iridescent Drake to the Altar of Dementia over and over and over again, it would constantly come back because of the Abduction and because of Iridescent Drake's ability, and then you would kill them with Altar of Dementia.
Because when Iridescent Drake enters the battlefield, you put an aura card from your graveyard on the battlefield attached to it. Abduction is like a weird enchanted control magic, essentially, when it enters the battlefield.
It's a weird control magic, yeah.
Yes, and when the enchanted creature dies, you
return
return that card. You return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control, and loop.
So Bob's your uncle. You bounce everything back and forth, and then you mill your opponent.
There you go. All right, so we turn the corner here to our number 3. My number 3, number 2 are both higher on someone else's list. So I'll see you guys at number 1. Aaron, what's number 3?
My number 3 is the last higher on my list.
Okay, Reuben, you want to carry us through number 3?
Sure. My number 3 is a card that I've referenced earlier. It is an extremely potent card, and it's a one of the cards that is of one of the most indelible cycles in all of Magic. My number 3 is Sword of Body and Mind. Sword of Body and Mind is a 3-mana equipment originally from Scars of Mirrodin. It was, of course, printed in From the Vault Relics as well. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from green and from blue. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, and that player mills 10 cards. There's that magic number again, and it equips for 2 colorless. So all of the swords cost 3, equip for 2, get +2/+2, give you 2 protections, and then do 2 things. Sword of Body and Mind did see play in Constructed, was most notably in the Mystic Cargo decks that were popular, mostly so that they, your creatures wouldn't get vapor snagged or what have you. But also today is mostly still known because it's a Cube All-Star. It's a ridiculous card to have in the Cube. Most of the Mill 10 cards, there's just a gentleman's agreement to not put in cubes. Jace Memory Adept, Glimpse the Unthinkable, things like that. This one still is. And people, are like, oh, but, it's okay to have this one because it's combat damage. It's still a sword, right? But this is by far the best sword in cube.
Man, when back in the day, when Scars of Mirrodin was being rumored, and this is going to be the next big fall set, and what could be in it, when we're going back to Mirrodin, could we have the swords? What kind of swords could we have? Are they going to complete the cycle? Because they didn't complete the cycle of enemy color swords and whatnot. And I got Feast and Famine for my preview card because Wizards didn't know how good that card was, and they actually gave me the best freaking card in the set. But for Sword of Body and Mind, you were like, are they really like? They're going to do something really cool with like the blue half, right? The green half is like, okay, you're going to make tokens, you're going to make 8 tokens, something like that.
Right.
And no one has guessed we're going to mill 10 cards with this thing. Like, what? Okay, I was thinking like making a copy of something or bouncing something or drawing some cards. I mean, like blue things. Mill 10. Okay, it's fine. Yeah. Card's great.
That was weird.
But I also am looking very much forward to them completing the sword cycle. We got Sword of Sinew and Steel and Truth and Justice in Modern Horizons, and getting the rest of the allied swords is going to be super duper cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Let's see here. Move on here to number 2. Again, I don't have one, but I'll have a number 1. Aaron, what's number 2?
So my number 2 is part of a beloved strategy in Vintage that is simply known as 2-card Monty, meaning that if you have these 2 pieces of a combo, you essentially win the game. And it's a bit of an unusual combo. You know, you might argue that this is one of those that doesn't really mill to the graveyard, but it does, but it's a replacement effect. I'll let you all decide. My number 2 is Helm of Obedience. So Helm of Obedience was originally printed in Alliances. It's 4 colorless mana. It's an artifact. I'm gonna go. You want the old school text or the new school?
Probably the
Let's
new
go
school.
new school because the old school text will be here for
and
3
fair,
hours.
and even the new school text is a little wordy. So,
Yeah.
X mana, colorless. Tap. Target opponent mills a card, then repeats this process until a creature card or X cards have been put into their graveyard this way, whichever comes first. If 1 or more creature cards were put into that graveyard this way, sacrifice Helm of Obedience and put 1 of them onto the battlefield under your control. X cannot be 0. So how do you win the game, you're thinking? Do you think make a lot of mana? No! You play this with either Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void. And so because a card is not ever hitting the graveyard, you just keep going. And so it is very easy. You need 4 mana for this because you're going to ideally start with Leyline. And it's not hard to get the 4 mana to cast this. And then you only got to pour 1 additional mana into it and you win the game. I've won games on turn 1 with this before. Turn 2 is not unusual, or turn 3. And it is hilarious. And it just feels really good. It's a new way to win the game. The card still goes for about $20 depending on where you shop. But just, when you hear a 2-card Monty, you know what you're in for.
This was my number 3 because I love me a Helm. I think it's a really cool, powerful card. It's from Alliances. It's on the reserved list, so it's never probably going to be cheaper than $20-$21 as it is now. Right. And it is just part of one of those really cool combos of like, wait a minute, did I just lose? Like, it's one of those combos. You're like, oh, whoa, I didn't know that interacted that way. Scoop phase, right? You're like, okay.
And it's interesting because it's a combo that doesn't have to be the centerpiece of your deck. It can be put into other things. I've seen this out of Miracles decks. I've seen this out of Control decks. I've seen this out of Lands decks. You can just shove this wherever you happen to want. Very versatile combo and lots of replaceable pieces along with the Helm itself.
Absolutely. Card's super duper cool. All right. So Reuben, what's your number 2?
My number 2, you ever have an ice cream headache? Where you got your vasoconstriction and vasodilation going, and it like makes it really painful a lot of people call it brain freeze. And they made a magic card after that.
I did.
My number 3.
My number 9.
There you go. That's my number 2. Brain Freeze, colorless and blue, originally from Scourge, reprinted in Vintage Masters for you online players, is a colorless and blue instant. Target player mills 3 cards. Storm.
That's a $35 foil. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Printed one time.
Those vintage kids, those legacy kids, they like their foils.
I tell you what, goodness gracious. This card is on all of our lists for a reason.
Yeah.
Iconic Tim Hildebrandt art, by the way.
So this card started to see new life thanks to Underworld Breach, because you would cast Underworld Breach, you would do a bunch of things, you would storm yourself, so you would target yourself until your graveyard reached a certain capacity, until you were sure that you could keep fueling Underworld Breach and never run out of cards or mana, and then you turn it around on your opponent, and I've lost to it before. It feels amazing. I've also killed people with it before. And it's not hard to do. I mean, the combo itself is, but you don't have to storm that high to really get this thing going. And it's just amazing and hilarious. And Storm is great.
This has been the finishing Storm card for decks like High Tide, for Heartbeat, for Oath decks would run this card, for Paradoxical Outcome, Monastery Mentor decks, Breach decks. There was a Scepter Chant deck that would use this as a finisher. I mean, it's pretty much, I would say, I would rather have Brain Freeze in a lot of circumstances when you would think you would want Tendrils of Agony as the way to finish. And it's certainly one of the top 2 finishers, way above Grape Shot, which is saying something.
Storm is just unbelievable. They put that mechanic in Walmart. I want y'all to know that. Storm in Walmart, y'all. The Storm scale exists because this type of spell exists that we're looking at. It's ridiculous. And it's also one of those cards that, like, it's like a $6 uncommon because they're probably not going to reprint it. I mean, where does Wizards want to reprint this? I
Right.
mean, I just don't know. All right, let's move on here to our number one. Let's see. First things first, I share my number one with someone else, and that would be
Not me.
one Rubes. Well, there you go. Our number one is timeless, classic. I mean, if our number one didn't exist, we wouldn't even have the name of this freaking list. We wouldn't even have arguing over number 5 because it doesn't include the word that's part of the title of this card in the freaking list. Reuben, what's number one, buddy?
Well, the other thing is I wouldn't just slot this into number one if it didn't also have competitive bona fides as being the win condition of the winning deck of Pro Tour 1 in Pro Tour 1996, Blue-White Control, where the win condition was Millstone. Millstone is a 2 colorless mana artifact most recently printed in the Mystery Booster or Core Set 2019, depending on which one you want to pay attention to first. But it goes all the way back to the beginning.
To Antiquities.
And it's from Antiquities.
Yes.
And it says 2 colorless and tap, target player, mills 2 cards.
That's where it came from. There would be no milling without Millstone. And it's one of those cards that this is like a beautiful thing that only Magic gets to do, right? Yeah. It creates a thing literally like 25 years ago. And because it made the thing 25 years ago, it gets to name the thing now that we all understand what it does. Yep. That's gorgeous. That's fantastic. No other game gets that ability. That's fantastic.
And the card never has to see any play again. It's already made its impact, So I mentioned, people trying to make Millstone work in competitive formats. And I don't even think it's good enough for limited at that point, but you will know what a millstone is when you hear the word mill. That's a legacy right there.
Absolutely. And Millstone is it's indelible forever, and that original art. I mean, they've changed the art, and I like the new art, but that original art is
the old school stone with the etchings.
It's maybe the most indelible piece of Magic art in my mind, personally.
I'm very happy that they lowered it to just an uncommon. This was not a rare effect.
Not
honestly.
A rare anymore.
Even in 10th edition, it was a stretch. They
were trying in Wizards to think, what can the word be? We want to keyword this. What can the word be? And there's no word that encapsulates it in English. But fortunately, we speak this other language. We speak this Magic, the Gathering language. And mill always is what it is.
Just
you always say mill. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You have the word.
Reinvent the meal, as it were.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Aaron, what's your number one?
I want in on this red zone action, okay? Because it's not about who did it first. It's about who did it better. My number one's Grindstone. Yeah. So Grindstone is 1 colorless, which originally printed in Tempest. Love Tempest, by the way. It's an artifact. 3 colorless, and you tap it. Put the top 2 cards of target player's library into that player's graveyard. If both cards share at least 1 color, repeat this process. Aaron, how am I going to make this work? Like, what is that going to do? I don't know if I can keep that going. Well, let me introduce you to a card called Painter's Servant. So Painter's Servant is 2 colorless, artifact creature Scarecrow with 1 power, 3 toughness. When Painter's Servant comes into play, you choose a color. All cards that aren't in play, spells, and permanents are the chosen color in addition to the other colors. So it enters the battlefield and you go, blow! You activate Grindstone once, and then whoop! This is the other combo that's usually found in the 2-card Monty decks. You're either on the Helm Leyline plan or the Painter Grindstone plan, whichever of the 2 you can assemble first. Painter Servant's been a thing in Legacy forever, usually in like a mono red shell. Ruben's played it before. Yeah. Just a hilarious combo. It's a nightmare on Magic Online. It makes your cards this weird hue of gold and throws everything off. And just, I've had so much fun with this card because it's just sort of you draw into it and then whoop. It feels amazing.
This was my number 6, so we all had it in our top 10.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, this was my number 2 because, again, this is one of the most powerful tournament winning. My gosh, Reuben, you won many hundreds of dollars thanks to this card.
I won thousands of dollars thanks to this card. Absolutely, yeah. I've mulliganed to 4 and won on turn 1 with this card.
Wow.
Grindstone is, boy, that's a heck of a line of text that they recopped onto Sphinx's tutelage later. Which was nice. And this is it's tough to argue against Grindstone, but it mills 2 cards. It doesn't grind 2 cards.
It's true.
Well, I don't see nothing wrong with a little mill and grind, okay?
A little grind? Yeah, a little mill and grind.
Wow.
Best part of waking up. Is a little
Is
bit
a
of mill and
millstone
grind.
in your cup?
This is Maine. All right, this is Maine. All right, got it. Look, that was our top 10
We've
mill
certainly
cards.
separated the wheat from the chaff.
Oh, that's
and
good.
have put it into the mill to create the
Well,
finest bread for our
Well,
people.
people who live in glass houses don't throw millstones. So
That's right.
Wow, we got to get that bread, y'all. That's what we got to do.
Speaking of getting that bread, we do need the dough. So if you want to...
Oh, Jesus.
And that was our top 10 mill cards. You'll see them on screen right now. For your review, take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Reuben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my two co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
How about a wine stone? You know, like for wind it up. Just wind it up.
Thank you, Reuben.
You're quite welcome. There's lots of stones of various kinds. We've got
Yeah.
whetstones, grindstones,
Grindstone would be pretty great. Just
Yeah.
Well,
We could top 10 stones next week.
I got the stones for that.
Oh, hey. Wow.
Look, I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Reuben Bressler, you guys for watching or listening. I hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv @magicmics, on Twitter @magicmicescast, our Magic Mike subreddit, and like the Magic Mike's page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at magicmikespodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at magicmikespodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes and Spotify. Or just join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.